part of your master's level training in whatever area of the quantitative science you're interested in will be some of these skills. But it's honestly, it's very easy with hindsight to see how right all the things that one has said over the last 40, 30 or 20 years are. But that's what's going on there, is strong selection. You know, we remember the forecasts we made that are correct, and we forget the forecasts we made that were incorrect. And I think it's just going to be very difficult to see.
I think that there is some, I don't know either, the answer, but it reminds me of some discussions that have been happening in the social science community for some time about degrees in particularly sociology, but not just sociology, other forms of social science, which, compared with some other countries, are certainly lacking in quantitative skills in many universities. And psychologists, geographers, sociologists, social anthropologists, not being required to have any real foundation in statistical skills. And although I'd love to think that Andrew was right, the degree of either inertia or outright opposition, even to the kinds of statistical skills that I would like to see social science undergraduates having, let alone certainly master's students, but even undergraduates, means that I'm a bit worried that actually once these things develop and they have a label, then they develop a funding mechanism and a life of their own, which actually means that the separation between them and others grows rather than diminishes. So I think there's a real challenge to how do you do it? I don't know, but that's my worry.
Well, I mean, one way to think about your question, you asked it in terms of PhD students. I heard an answer to that question the other day that was something like, well, it's going to depend on the university. Some statistics departments might focus on theory, and others on methods, and others on computing. But as Jill and others were saying, when you think about how some of that training trickles down or propagates down to the master's level, which is often where people will go for a year if they're looking for a job, and then finally to the undergraduate level, if you're talking about it, I think it really isn't clear quite how it's going to play out. I mean, probably all of us around this table have had the experience of teaching, basic regression to biologists or something like this, and so I don't know. Will there be a day when we're teaching basic clustering and data mining to everyone across the university at undergraduate level? I'm not sure. Ruth, did you want to weigh in on any of this?
Yeah, I was going to. So I just set up an MSc in Stats with Data Science at Edinburgh, which kicks off next month. And the number of emails we've had about interest for it looks like we're going to way over recruit from what we were expecting. There's huge demanding people coming up. And again, if you look at any university, most of them now will have a data science institute. So there is some, I think it's one of the questions Patrick also sort of suggested to us to look at. There's a demand in the population for data science. So I think there is some call for us to satisfy that demand. And there are jobs. A lot of people going into jobs. Ben, who's in the audience here, did an MSc in St Andrews a few years ago, and I was there in applied statistics and data mining. And in about 8 years of that master's programme, we used to have between 10 and 15, sometimes slightly higher than that, students a year. No one left without a job. So there is demand. We all know it's a shortage area in statistics. And with data science, it's getting worse.
Or better.
Or better. So there is this issue. But the other side of this as well, I've also had in conversations, I was chatting to Rachel, who's a geographer, who's now in the Young Stats meeting. People are recognising this in disciplines and doing it. And I only had an email 3 days ago from an MSc student in sort of starting his MSc in psychology in Edinburgh, wants to take 60 credits of stats courses. I don't think he's got the background, but that's a different. So even it's quite close to it. So there is this demand that I think we should be looking at addressing. But who's going to know in 5 years what this is going to be like? Are data scientists going to become under a different name? Are they going to become just statisticians? I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it not only rests on what we teach people, but it rests on the labeling we use to describe what it is that we do, which is something we talked about earlier. Other questions from the audience, or a next question from the audience? Okay.
So it's maybe related to what Andrew was saying about kind of communicating statistics. So I've been talking to some business people recently, and they seem to like certainty and confidence quite a lot, right? So we kind of deal with like uncertainty, and I sometimes feel that being uncertain in a business environment is seen as a weakness, or it is seen as a weakness, basically. How do you balance the issue of expressing the uncertainty that you kind of believe lies in whatever inference you do? Also understanding the data, not just predicting. When you predict things, maybe it's easier, right? You have a good measure. But if you're doing like clustering and things like this, then you know there's issues there. And how do you express that to people in a business where they want this kind of confidence?
I mean, I would say just very quickly, I mean, the question isn't just about explaining a result to a colleague or a policymaker or something like this. I mean, there are core technical challenges with expressing uncertainty, I mean, especially in high dimension or when the data sets have difficult, interesting structures. But so I mean, it's a deep question on one level technically, but I also very much take your point on that. Ruth, I think you were starting to.
Well, it goes back to what I think really, you want to start early, and it's all to do with some basic training of anyone that goes to university should have a basic course in statistics, just knowing what data is. And I wonder whether this is slightly happening in some places. For example, MOOCs. Statistics is one of the most common MOOCs that people do. But how do you tell people they need to understand it? And that's the difficult bit. Some people that know that they lack this area they're the people you don't have to worry about. So I don't know what the answer is.
It comes back to one of your earlier points about knowing what you don't know, which of course applies quite generally, but this advice perhaps most honored of the breach.
I think you're right. This is a genuinely tricky problem. People want they want an answer. So if they want to know what's happening in price inflation over the last year, they don't want to be told about Carly and Jevons. And they want to know, how much the price has gone up. But I think that's a case in point. So actually telling them about aggregation isn't going to help. But saying to people, well, we want to know what the inflation level is. Do you really think that the inflation level facing you is the same as the inflation level facing her and him, given you've got different bundles of goods? And then you may start getting people to realise that actually the answer they'd love to have is not available because it's the wrong question. And I think one of the things that we need to be a bit more bold about with business people, but also with the media and politicians, is sometimes they want an answer to a question that is not well formulated. So I think we need to be bold. Having said that, academics as a group and statisticians as a part of that, and this goes for public servants as well, it's sometimes fair to characterise and explain all the reasons why we can't answer the question, rather than thinking of what a rather similar question that we can answer might be. And I think that is something that we could be a bit more creative about. So sometimes there isn't a straight answer to the question that the businesswoman is asking you, but you could say to her, well, actually that's that's rather tricky, but what we can say is this. And I think sometimes there's a tendency to be very precise about what we can't say and not think enough about what we can say.
So we think we should be more like politicians?
No, no, because I think I don't mean we should twist words. We should ask ourselves the question, well, so we may not have this bit of information, or we may not be able to answer this analytical question, but here's a broadly similar analytical question, or broadly similar set of data where we have got something that we can say that might help answer the kind of question that the politician or businesswoman was asking. So that's one thing. Say on the more negative side, I think we have to recognise that there just are some things that people are bad at. So my favourite game is to play, not with this group, but with non-statisticians, is the Monty Hall problem. And even with people who are statisticians but not absolute, I played it with a group of 100 medical statisticians not long ago. 98 of them got it wrong. Because actually I think we need to recognise that there are certain sorts of statistical thinking which just aren't, they're not natural. And I think it's important for us to recognise that when we're communicating, that some of what we're doing just doesn't come naturally to people, and that means we need to work even harder to explain it.
I think that's a great point. I mean, all of us have been through the sort of canon of statistical thinking, and we have a lot of professional responsibilities around that in terms of helping people make good decisions. But I think maybe Andrew's advice could be understood as kind of, having absorbed that education, one has to sometimes wear it lightly and not fall victim to that trap of just simply telling people over and over what you can't do, or why you can't give them that p-value, or perhaps why that p-value is not the right thing at all to ask. Other comments from Jill or David?
Just, I totally endorse what has just been said. I think it's a great question, a very difficult question, and I think the solution lies in communication, engagement. I just wanted to add one little extra twist, which is I think we statisticians, experts in uncertainty, often have a tendency to sort of disparage people. We want a very clear answer. Well, I'm afraid there isn't such a thing as a clear answer. It could be this with probability 0.25 or this with probability 0.75, and that's all one can say. And so in some sense we sort of perhaps sometimes tend to take the moral high ground as well. But the fact is, the painful fact is, that the person on the other end, a politician or business person, whatever, has got to make a decision. So they've got to come down one side.